We're muted, right?
I don't know that, I guess.
I believe we're recording.
Okay, great. So if everyone could go on mute, that would be fantastic. And welcome to Planning for Emerald Ash Borer, Best Practices for Managing Adirondack Ash Woodlands. So just before we get started, a few tips on how to use Zoom before we begin. So in your, and forgive me, because I do not know my left and right, it's a lifelong affliction. But on the lower left hand of your screen, you'll see a little microphone icon. You can click that on and off in order to go on mute if you're getting feedback, or to put yourself off of mute if you're going to ask a question. We've built in a lot of time at the end of today's workshop in order to ask a lot of questions. We have 30 minutes built in, but we're always available to answer questions via email or phone call, one day in person and consulting. And we can connect you to a lot of different resources as well. You also have a stop video or start video button right next to your microphone in case your dog comes in or your kids are running around, and or you don't want us to see your office or something, your home office or something like that. Like, for example, I just moved and my office is full of boxes. We also have a chat box, which is going to be something we do use quite a bit in this workshop. If you have registered for this workshop with the Society of American Foresters and you need to request continuing education credits for your participation in this workshop, we're going to ask you to plug in your info at the end. But also, this is where I'm hoping we can collect a lot of your questions throughout the workshop so that I can organize everything and have it ready. Something pops into your head while we're talking, we'll be able to review that towards the end. Becca, can I ask you right now as the host to mute all? And then I'll unmute myself, just in case, because I'm getting feedback. I also have bad hearing, so I apologize to everybody in advance.
Emily, how do I mute everyone at once?
It's a good question. I think you can go to the list of participants and hit their microphone if it's still open. And if you're on the phone, you can hit *6 to mute yourself. And that's a good question that someone's already using the chat box, so thank you. The recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel after the workshop, and I'll email out the link in addition to lots of different resources to you later as a follow-up. Just reviewing the agenda now. Oh, I think Becca, you took control again. So if you want to advance the next slide. All right, so just want to let everybody know where we're going today and when. So we'll go through a few more introductions of my part, and then I'll be quiet and give the stage over to our guest speakers today. We're going to talk about emerald ash borer in the Adirondacks. So it's present in the North Country and has been for a while, but this year is the first time it was identified within the blue line. And so, you know, we're a lot different than a lot of parts of the United States that have EAB present. And so we're going to talk about, you know, what APIP is doing, locations, history of the site, and, you know, where we're going next. Then we're going to jump into, you know, the meat and potatoes of the talk, which is ash management. How do you want to manage ash in a home situation? Like, for example, I live in a village and I only own one ash tree, but some people on the call have hundreds of acres. But then also, how are you going to manage ash in your woodlot if your land is working lands? After that, we're going to talk about some citizen science opportunities. There are opportunities to participate in a lot of, you know, early detection in order to act rapid response. Then Q&A, so that'll be a meatier portion of today's talk. We've noticed in a lot of our, more management specific workshops that people have a lot of questions, and we want you to have questions because we have the experts here to help answer those. And then we'll wrap it up most likely by 11:30, possibly earlier. Next slide, please, Becca. I haven't introduced myself at all. My name is Emily Bell-Dynan. I am APIP's first full-time education and outreach coordinator. I know that a number of you said you've worked with APIP for a really long time. It's really nice to meet you. I started in April, so I haven't really worked in our office very much at all, but I look forward to getting to meet a lot of you in the field going forward. We also have on the line, so our first speaker today is Becca, or Rebecca, but we call her Becca Bernacki. She started this spring as well, right after me in May, and she's APIP's full-time terrestrial invasive species project coordinator. You might be familiar if you've worked with APIP in the past with Zach Simak. He's still with us. He's moved on to a different role and he does more GIS management for early detection, rapid response now. Becca has a lot of experience working with emerald ash borer and is excited to be here with you today, and I'm sure she'll share that as well. Becca's experience with emerald ash borer is extensive and started in graduate school, where she organized all of her graduate research at SUNY Brockport around ecosystem impacts of EAB in just upstate New York, Becca, or also like the Appalachian chain?
It was just in Western and Central New York.
Great, thank you. And then Erin Barriger is the St. Lawrence Soil Water Conservation District Forester and graduated from SUNY ESF with a BS in Forest Resource Management, and has been managing and monitoring for EAB throughout New York State in urban and forested settings for the past 10 years. So we're really, really excited to work with Erin, and we love working with all of the North Country Soil Water Conservation Districts. And a lot of the soil water conservation districts in your county, depending on where you're calling in from, most likely also have a district forester as well. So we're excited to connect you to other SWCDs as well as other prisms in case you're not in our territory. I'll get to that in a second. So Becca, could you go to the next slide? I'm also I drink like an incredible amount of coffee. So if I'm going too fast, please let me know. But I want to cover a lot of stuff today. So just to use the chat, and I notice a few people already are, because we don't have that. I love people, and we're all very isolated. So I would love to talk to all of you, but we don't have the time to verbalize it. So if folks could just introduce themselves in the chat, who you are, where you're chatting in from, what's your role with trees, and that way we can also start getting to use the chat, and I'll be able to read through it and be able to get to know all of you a little bit better. So while you're doing that, I'll also talk about, if you go to the next slide, please. So what is the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program? Where do I work? Where does Becca work? Who works with Erin? So APIP, as we're called, is one of New York State's 8 partnership for regional invasive species management, or the acronym is a PRISM, as we call it. So this map represents all the different territories of New York State's 8 different PRISMs. APIP covers all 6 million acres of the Adirondack State Park. Although I'm not supposed to say state park, I apologize. Adirondack Park. But we also go all the way up in Clinton and Franklin counties, all the way up to the Canadian border, and then all the way over east to the shores of Lake Champlain. We work really closely with the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario PRISM as our neighbors to the west, and also the Capital Mohawk region, where a lot of our visitors bringing invasive species with them are often coming from the Capital District region, because it's the most populated area near us. If you happen to be calling in from a different PRISM region but want to connect with those organizations and professionals to talk about invasive species in your area, one of the follow-up resources I'll share with you via email with the recording and other links will be how to contact your PRISM in your area. We are funded by the New York State Department of Conservation, and we're housed and managed by, our prism is, the Nature Conservancy in the Adirondacks. All of these prisms live in different organizations, and we live in the Nature Conservancy. Becca, next slide, please. All right, so I'm just on time, and I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague Becca, and we'll get into emerald ash borer in the Adirondacks, and I'll go on mute. But I'll also, before I stop, I'll be collecting your questions as Becca speaks. Car alarm just started in my front driveway. So if you have questions while Becca's speaking, please just pop them into the chat and I'll be tracking all of those.
So welcome folks, and thanks Emily for that great introduction. Just to reiterate, my name is Becca Bernacki and I'm the Terrestrial Invasive Species Project Coordinator here at APIP. So without further ado, let's get into emerald ash borer in the Adirondacks. So I thought we'd be remiss if we talked about emerald ash borer without first talking about ash and how to identify ash, since that is the native species that this invasive pest targets and kills. So I think the first thing we should do is talk about how to identify ash, because you're going to go out and identify ash trees before you go look for the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer. And I'm not going to go quite in order with this slide because it's in winter time, and the number one thing I use when I'm identifying ash is the bark. So if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a picture of mature ash bark. I guess before I get into this, I should mention that green and white ash are our most common ash species in the Adirondacks. We also have some black ash, and black ash bark's a little bit different, but these other characteristics still hold true. So when we look for mature ash bark, what I really look for are these deep diamond-shaped ridges. So if you kind of look in the upper center of that picture of bark, you'll see a really clear diamond shape. And once you learn how to key your eye into this bark, it really pops out at you. The other thing that I use to identify ash that can be used in winter is the branching patterns. So if you look in the lower left-hand picture, you will see that the branches of ash trees are directly opposite from each other as opposed to being alternate on the stem. When we get into the growing season, I'll look for leaves. The leaves of ash are compound, so they have multiple leaflets per leaf as opposed to being a simple leaf like a maple leaf. And there are generally 5 to 7 leaflets per leaf for ash trees. And finally, I'll look for seeds in the fall. And the seeds on ash trees are sort of similar to what those helicopters you see falling from maple trees, except for they're only one side of that and they're more oar-shaped. So there's still some arrows or wind-driven seeds. And I kind of use that maple analogy to kind of get folks keyed in, but they are a little bit different in that they're single-sided and more oar-shaped. We should also talk about where ash is present across our state. So if you look at this map, you'll see that the more dark green you see represents more ash present. So the areas of our state that really have a lot of ash present are kind of the Lake Ontario Basin area, and emerald ash borer has unfortunately already traveled through this area. If we look at the Adirondacks, you're probably looking at this and saying, it doesn't look like we have much ash here. And that's true on a broader sense, but if we look at the northern portions of Franklin and Clinton counties, as well as the lake basins for Lake George and Lake Champlain, we'll see that we have higher densities of ash. It's also pretty important to note that this map's a view of the entire state, so it's pretty zoomed out. And even in these areas that look more white, it's very common to see locally high ash densities, especially along rivers. Excuse me, I'm just admitting a few folks to our webinar. So why is ash important and why do we care? And there's this really great quote by Tom Brown at the Montpelier Bridge, and he says that the average 12-inch diameter ash tree provides about $131 annually in benefits to homeowners. They filter the air, they slow and absorb stormwater, they store carbon, they conserve energy through shade, and they also increase property values. So if we look at these two kind of side-by-side pictures on the bottom of our screen, we can see a beautiful street lined by ash trees on the left-hand side and the effects of emerald ash borer on the right-hand side. So all those trees have died as a result of emerald ash borer. Those homeowners have lost those benefits, and now they also have a hazard tree on their hands. And Erin's going to talk a little bit more about that. But what I really like about this quote from Tom is it kind of hits the high points. We're thinking about ecological values and economic values. And I have a one example for each, but this is far from inclusive below. So ash trees are ecologically valued. They provide key food and habitat for our wildlife. They're culturally valuable. Black ash in particular is important to numerous Native American tribes that use them for their basket making. And they're also commercially valuable. Wooden baseball bats are almost exclusively made of ash wood because the wood is so strong and flexible. Ash is also used for furniture, flooring, and firewood. The last thing I wanted to mention on this slide is you look at these pictures below and you see these ash trees dying back, and we're looking at street trees here, but this also happens in woodlots. And when this happens in woodlots, we're opening the canopy up and creating canopy gaps, and that disturbance really helps facilitate other invasive species. So that's something we should keep in the back of our minds. So now that we've talked about ash, I'll get into emerald ash borer a bit. And I have this nice photo here taken by Gwendolyn Craig at the Adirondack Explorer. And this shows myself along with our fearless leader, Tamara, and we're kind of digging into an ash tree here, looking at the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer that I'll talk about in just a minute. So what is the emerald ash borer, or Gryllus plenipennis? The emerald ash borer is an invasive beetle, and it is capable of killing healthy ash trees within 1 to 5 years. It's about 1/2 inch long, and it has this really beautiful metallic green wings with a copper-colored abdomen. Next, we're going to talk about the life cycle of emerald ash borer, and this life cycle is really important to talk about because this life cycle is what facilitates the method of destruction for ash trees. So the life cycle begins when a female emerald ash borer lays 40 to 70 and even up to 100 eggs on the crevices of the bark of an ash tree. After those eggs hatch, the larvae will burrow into the tree and remain just below the bark, feeding on the vascular tissue or the xylem or the phloem of the tree. And that's that action of eating through the vascular tissues that cuts off the tree's ability to transport nutrients up and down between the leaves and the roots. These larvae will remain under the bark feeding for 1 to 2 years before they pupate into adults. The adults will then chew the telltale D-shaped exit holes in the exterior of the bark, and the adults will fly off to begin the process anew. So as we just talked about, it's really that larval feeding that kills the ash trees. So here we have a picture of myself peeling some bark off of an ash tree, and you can really see those telltale serpentine galleries as the emerald ash borer larvae have eaten through the layer below the tree, the bark of the tree. So how does emerald ash borer spread? So these guys typically only fly about 1/2 mile on their own after emergence. However, this is highly dependent on ash density, emerald ash borer density, and also local factors such as topography. So if you think about an emerald ash borer, that adult that emerges and all the nearby trees have been killed by emerald ash borer, it may have to fly a little bit further. I think the furthest I've seen them recorded to fly is about 6 miles. Long distance movement of these guys is really facilitated by human activities and has been directly linked to the transport of both firewood and nursery stock. New York State in particular, since we all live in New York State, has a firewood regulation that says untreated firewood cannot be transported more than 50 miles from its point of origin. And when we talk about untreated firewood, we're talking about firewood that has not been heated to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 75 minutes. Even though this quarantine is only 50 miles, if you were to take ash from, say, the Scroon site that we're going to talk about in a little bit and move it to other regions of the Adirondacks, you could potentially spread emerald ash borer into areas where it's not present, and that could be devastating to us. So it's important to keep that in mind. So what are the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer? And I like this background slide. It's a little icky, but it shows those larvae actually feeding. I thought that was pretty cool. So when we talk about the signs and symptoms here, I'm going to start out talking about things that you can see from further away. If you're driving down the street, things you can see, and we're going to get closer and closer to the tree as we go. So the first thing when I'm riding down the road looking for trees that might be impacted by emerald ash borer is canopy dieback. So this canopy dieback typically begins in the upper 1/3 of the tree, which you can see pretty well exhibited on this tree here. And that happens as the vascular tissue is destroyed, and it's harder and harder for the trees to transport nutrients and water up and down. The next thing I look for is woodpecker damage. And when I'm at the street level, driving by, I'm really looking for the picture on the left here. This is what is known as blonding. Blonding occurs when woodpeckers strip the bark off of the trees, trying to get at those larvae. And this blonding is pretty obvious from far away. We may also see deeper holes or the woodpeckers opening up the D-shaped exit holes from the adults. Typically, this occurs in the later stages of EAB. The final thing you can typically see at the street level are what are known as epicormic shoots. And these are suckers that come off the main trunk of the tree. And these are formed because, as we talked about, that vascular tissue is destroyed. So the tree is really trying to send out new shoots so that they can photosynthesize closer to the roots. Usually when this happens, the tree's too far gone to be saved. Now we're getting closer. So when I get closer to the tree, I start looking for the bark splitting. Oftentimes the bark, because it becomes dried out, will split and crack away from the tree and will expose these S-shaped serpentine galleries. So these last two things we're going to talk about are really the diagnostic features that we need to see present before we can say for certain that a tree was killed by emerald ash borer. The other things are great signs and symptoms in QSIN, but these last two are the really diagnostic ones. So we have these S-shaped or serpentine galleries that we've talked about multiple times that are formed by the larval feeding. And we also have the D-shaped exit holes. These exit holes are about the size of the back of your pencil, but D-shaped, and those are formed by the adults leaving the tree. So kind of the meat and potatoes and why I think a lot of folks are here are they want to hear about the status of emerald ash borer in the Adirondacks. This is a photo taken at the first just confirmed site within the Adirondack blue line. So we can see a lot of those things I talked about. We can see the epicormic shoots, we can see blonding, we can see canopy dieback. 2020 was a rough year for emerald ash borer in the APIP prism. We had 11 new confirmed locations. Most of those were confirmed outside of the Adirondack blue line or the Adirondack Park, with 3 confirmed locations in Franklin County and 4 in Clinton County. We also had 4 confirmed locations in Warren County, and those are what we're going to talk about next. So within the Adirondack blue line, the first confirmed location was at the Warren County Canoe Access Site, right on the Scrum River. This site was reported to us by New York State DOT staff, and I went out to confirmed EAB and let our state partners know. They went out, gathered some larvae, and sent it out for confirmation. If you're looking at this tree, you're going, okay, Becca, I see the canopy dieback. I see those epicormic shoots. Yeah, I'm seeing the signs even from this distance. So this tree's pretty far gone. There's no canopy left. It's pretty dead. The emerald ash borer has likely been here for several years. It's pretty far removed from our known location, so it's very, very, very unlikely that it spread here on its own. And this area is surrounded by a lot of campgrounds, so it's very likely that emerald ash borer was brought to this area via firewood. Once this initial confirmation was made, we met with our DEC partners to decide what to do next. And the decision was made to do a 5-mile road corridor survey and a 5-mile buffer around our initial confirmation point. So what we did is we went out, we drove in pairs around the area looking for the signs and symptoms of EAB. And if we suspected a tree, if it was on the public road right of way, we'd go out and look. And if not, we'd just kind of record it as a suspected tree. So you'll see in my notes here, I have suspected but unconfirmed. And those are trees that might have been on private property, and we could see from a distance that they looked like they had emerald ash borer, but we couldn't get up close to strip off bark and look for those larval galleries or the D-shaped exit holes. So when you're looking at this map, you'll see our green confirmed dots, and I'll talk about that one further south in a minute here. But we were able to confirm 2 additional sites on the eastern side of the I-87 corridor. We are very lucky in that we did not find any suspected trees west of I-87 or the Scroon River corridor there. I have a few kind of hints of our unconfirmed sites here with those yellow dots. I didn't include them all because it busies it up. This kind of shows that we were finding them at the edge of our buffer. So EAB likely extends beyond our buffer. And we found over 30 suspected but unconfirmed trees east of I-87. We also took some time and sent outreach material to local campgrounds, letting them know what EAB is and that it's in the area, and also a lot of material about our Don't Move Firewood campaign. So that's what we did in 2020. What are we doing in 2021 going forward? We'll likely expand those road corridor surveys and see just how far these infestations spread. We're working with DEC and USDA partners very closely to evaluate sites for candidate biocontrol release in 2022. We are likely going to place and monitor emerald ash borer traps throughout the region to again see how far the emerald ash borer infestation has spread. You folks are all part of this next bullet. We're going to increase our educational offerings, so thanks you for joining us today. We will grow our outreach and continue our outreach to the local campgrounds. So with that, I will pass the torch to Aaron, if you want to request control, Aaron.
All right, thank you. Perfect. Okay. All right. So thanks for having me. It's good to be here this morning. I'd like to start off by saying that all the information I'm presenting today is through the combined efforts of multiple universities and agencies and over 18 years of research since EAB's arrival back in 2002. So first things first, start off with a little public service announcement. Infested ash trees can be very dangerous and can pose a risk to public safety. So all species of ash trees are susceptible to EAB and will kill nearly every untreated ash tree. Once ash trees are infested, they can become extremely hazardous very quickly, losing 80% of their structural integrity within 3 to 5 years. They also become very brittle very quickly, and they can drop entire limbs, or trees can break off at the base and fall over without warning, or any external force such as a strong wind. There's actually a study conducted back in 2013 by Tim Walsh to see just how dangerous these trees can be. He found that EAB killed ash trees have similar structural integrity to that of a styrofoam cup. And that study was utilizing sonic tomography, which uses acoustic sound waves to measure wood densities. So just to emphasize, if you have an ash tree that's next to your house and needs to be removed, it's very important that it's done by a professional. And if the tree can be treated or removed prior to becoming infested, that will always be your cheapest and safest option for both you and the arborist doing the work. As Becca mentioned earlier, EAB was recently discovered in the Adirondack Park this past summer in Warren County. Once EAB is found in a new location, it will generally spread at a rate of 1 to 2 miles per year. And this is without human assistance, so without the movement of infested material such as firewood. This estimate is found to correlate with ash density. So basically, if there's a higher composition of ash in an area, there will be less of a need for EAB to travel to its next meal, that meal being an ash tree. On the other hand, if ash densities are lower, EAB will have to travel farther for its next meal, therefore spreading farther and faster. Ash density in the Adirondack Park is generally lower, as Becca showed with that map before, at around 5% or less composition in general. So it's possible EAB could spread through the Adirondacks at a slightly higher rate compared to the rest of the state. This would be just in a forested setting. So from an urban perspective, or in towns and villages and hamlets, you could expect this not to be the case. Just from urban plantings, ash trees were readily planted after to actually replace Dutch elm disease killed trees. So they're really good urban trees. So in towns and stuff, it could be a whole total different situation. So it's really good to actually have an inventory done to find out if that's the case. So with this in mind, it's important to start thinking about managing your trees sooner than later. And depending on your location to the current known infestation in Warren County or other infestations throughout New York State, it's recommended to start treatments or removals when EAB is known to be within 10 miles of your home or woodlot. And again, like Becca discussed before, not moving firewood, buying as local as possible, burning all of your firewood supply in one season. These are some of the best ways you can help slow the spread of EAB and other forest invasive pests. Depending on your location, it might be time for you to start thinking about treating or removing your ash trees. So some aspects to look at when trying to decide to treat or remove are removal costs compared to treatment costs, what kind of monetary and ecological value the tree provides, or if the tree simply has sentimental value to and provides aesthetics and beauty to the landscape. A really good resource to help provide you with this information is the National Tree Benefit Calculator. You can simply go to the treebenefitcalculator.com, type in your zip code and some information about your tree, and it will show you annual benefits of the tree that provides in heating and cooling costs, property value, air quality, erosion control, that kind of thing. So for an example, if you have a 20-inch ash tree next to your house in Warren County, it could potentially provide you with $195 in benefits per year. Breaking this down a little further and taking that same 20-inch ash tree next to your house as an example, you can compare treatment costs and removal costs. So if you decide to remove it, removal costs would be around $1,200 for removal and stump grinding, and then replacement with a 2-inch caliper bald and burlap tree delivered and planted from the nursery would be around $360. So a total of around $1,500 for removal and replacements. If you decide to save and treat the tree, single tree treatment costs are around $10 per inch of diameter. So a 20-inch ash tree would cost about $200, and this would have to be treated every 2 years to keep it alive. So treatment costs over 10 years, 4 years, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And assuming tree growth is roughly a half an inch per year, treatment will cost around $1,000. Factoring in 10 years of annual value and growth and subtracting that from treatment costs, you are left with a net received value of around $1,000 and a big, beautiful 24-inch ash tree that will continue to provide benefits to you in the future. So basically what I'm saying, in the long run, it costs less to treat and you receive more value from your tree. So the next question would be, is your tree worth treating? So the first thing you want to look at is the size of the tree. In 2012, an economic optimization study was conducted that looked at the amount of time and money spent to grow a tree to a certain size versus removing and replacing that tree with an alternate species. This study found that a 12-inch diameter tree to be the theoretical cutoff point or that sweet spot, so to speak. So essentially, a smaller tree is not worth the time and money to keep alive because it can be replaced and provide a similar amount of benefits. Whereas a larger tree is worth treating and keeping alive because the benefits it provides outweighs the associated maintenance costs. Other factors to look at are form. So is the tree single stemmed? Is it structurally sound with minimal defects or decay? The location of the tree, does the tree provide benefits to your home? And then finally, is the tree healthy with less than 30% canopy dieback? Another thing to keep in mind is that it takes roughly 20 years for a newly planted tree to provide maximum economic and ecological benefits. So it's important when you're deciding this to really look at the value larger trees can provide and then determine if the tree is worth the investment.
Aaron, can I ask just a detailed question there?
Yep.
If you go back to the previous slide, so you're emphasizing it's more ideal, say in the small homeowner or the homeowner or the small acreage setting, to have that single stem tree when you're looking for growth. Is that correct?
Correct. So
Okay.
basically, in the future, that's just going to prevent the tree from having issues of splitting, decay and rot, that kind of thing. So if it's single stemmed, it's going to be less susceptible to damage.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. So the next thing to look at is when you should treat. So in most cases, the sooner the better, or like I said before, when EAB is known to be within 10 miles. If you find yourself late in the game and have already been infested with EAB, the next best option is to treat at the first signs of infestation. So if you start to see canopy decline, epicormic sprouts, blonding from woodpecker activity, you should start treating as soon as possible. Fortunately, if it is still possible to save a tree that has 30% or less canopy decline. So the picture to the right is a great example of what the different levels of canopy thinning and stages of decline look like. So you technically should save the tree with 50% dieback. After removing the dead wood, you wouldn't really be left with much of a tree at that point, and the canopy would have a really hard time regrowing back in what was lost. The tree with 30% dieback, on the other hand, could easily fill in those gaps and replace the canopy that was lost, leaving you with a nice, healthy, full-size canopy tree. So what treatment options are available and which ones work the best? A study was conducted by Purdue University that looked at the effectiveness of different kinds of insecticides applied at different times of the year. So this was a 4-year study, and it compared the differences of treating in spring and fall, and then the different kinds of insecticides and applications. So such as basal bark spray, soil drenches, or systemic injections. They actually found that systemic injections with emamectin benzoate mid to late spring, just after trees leafed out, to be one of the most effective methods to protecting against EAB. And if anyone has any questions or would like more information about treatment options, really good resource with a lot of this information summarized in the document Insecticide Options for Protecting Ash Trees from Emerald Ash Borer, which can be found at emeraldashborer.info, along with another great study that looks at potential side effects of systemic insecticide use, so which can also be found at emeraldashborer.info if you have any questions regarding that as well. So the next question you have is, will you always have to treat your tree? And the short answer is yes, but not as frequently after EAB populations decline. So initially, when EAB moves into an area, there's a very large population growth due to the high levels of the food source, that food source being an ash tree. And after about 10 to 15 years, EAB populations start to decline in that direct correlation with the decline of the food source. So as can be seen in this graph to the right. But unfortunately, there will always be a small residual population of EAB able to survive in the aftermath forest. As ash seeds germinate and seedlings regenerate, EAB is able to feed on these small saplings and sustain itself. One good thing is that after EAB have moved through an area and populations have declined, treatments can potentially be reduced to once every 3 to 5 years or longer, just because there is less pressure and damage from EAB populations, and therefore less of a need for insecticide treatments. But I highly want to emphasize this. In that first 10 to 15 years, it's really important to have those either yearly or every 2-year treatments to keep up with that high EAB population. Also, EAB populations will be further reduced and kept in check with help from parasitoids and native enemies such as woodpeckers in the aftermath forest following that initial population growth and decline. So there could be hope, and like I said, in the long run, it seems to be worth actually treating your tree. So if you have an ash tree next to your home, chances are you will need to be hiring an arborist. So some things to look at when hiring an arborist are certifications or accreditations that'll let you, the consumer, know that they have met a certain level of knowledge and training in the field of tree care and should be able to provide you with safe and ethical services. So a couple things you can look for are whether or not the arborist is certified through the International Society of Arboriculture, or if the company has a certified arborist on staff. If the tree care company is a member or is accredited through Tree Care Industry Association. And then if the company you're hiring has either of these, it'll let you know that they should follow safety and tree care industry standards and conduct business in a safe and legal manner. If you plan on treating your tree, you also want to make sure that the company or individual has a certified pesticide applicator's license. This is required through New York state law and also lets you know that they have met a certain level of education and experience to properly handle and apply these pesticides. Some other things to look at are proof that the company or individual carries full liability and workers' compensation insurance to protect you, both of you, in the event of an accident or damages. It's also a good idea to get multiple estimates or bids from different companies to ensure that you're getting a reasonable price for your work. And be sure to get a written quote that can be signed and agreed upon before the work starts. That written agreement should also state the level of cleanup that is required and whether or not the material will be disposed of or left on site, and if repairing damages to landscaping is required. Another thing you can do, just simply talk to the arborist, ask about their past experience, if they treated ash trees before, see if they have a proven track record, a good sound ethical work, that kind of thing. So a couple good ways to find arborists in your area are by going to treesaregood.org to find local ISA certified arborists, or TCIA.org to find accredited tree care companies. So with both of these sites, you can simply type in your zip code or select by the closest city and search for tree care companies within so many miles of your area. So it's a really, really handy, easy to use resource. All right, so switching gears a little and taking a look at managing EAB from a forested perspective. In some ways, woodlot owners can prepare for or respond to the presence of EAB. One of the first things to look at when managing your forest are why do you own your woodlands? What are you trying to accomplish with them? And then what are your goals and objectives? So more specifically, what are you using your woodlot for? So are you interested in creating wildlife habitat, generating economic revenue through timber harvesting, heating fuel for your home, recreation, using forest to produce food, helping offset climate change and pollution, or a combination of one or more of these things? So some things woodlot owners and land managers should take a look at or try to do, especially when managing for EAB, are always to be proactive rather than reactive. Managing your woodlot and having a plan set in place before EAB arrives will always be better in the long run. It will leave you better results and more management options to choose from. So you should try to stay knowledgeable on current woodland issues, such as invasive species, like we're talking about today, and other forest pests and diseases that can alter forest composition and negatively impact your goals and objectives. And simply becoming familiar with what is out there. So what species are present, what are some potential impacts, that kind of thing. And then taking these observations and using them to evaluate and implement appropriate management strategies to meet your goals and objectives for your woodlot. So one of the best and easiest ways to accomplish all of this is working with a professional forester, whether it be a state forester, private consulting forester, or industry forester. They can all help provide knowledge and assistance to you to help you meet your goals and objectives. A really good resource to help find qualified professional foresters in your area is the New York State DEC's Cooperating Forester Program. So this is a list of private foresters that have met a certain level of education experience and adhere to New York State's timber harvesting guidelines and Society of American Foresters Code of Ethics. So it's a really good place to start. And as I mentioned before, you have to know what you have to actually be able to manage it. So having an inventory done is the first step in finding out how much ash you have, and how much of an impact EAB will or has had in your forest. So if you find that ash makes up less than 20% of your stand, chances are there will be minimal impacts overall. And you could choose to do a light thinning to salvage some of the ash, or do nothing at all and have very little, if any, negative effects overall of forest health. If you find that ash component is greater than 20%, you might have to manipulate the stand to compensate for that much of a loss. So depending on your situation, it could be time for a timber sale if you have adequate volumes. You might want to look at timber stand improvement cuts that focus on ash removal. You may need to establish crop trees or plants, or you may simply need to increase biodiversity. Again, it all kind of depends on what level of ash is present and what your situation is. Generally speaking, with most kinds of management, you want to be able to actually control the amount of sunlight that is able to reach the forest floor. So keeping canopy gaps to 60 feet or less will help promote the regeneration of shade-tolerant species such as oaks, hickories, maples. And then by providing proper levels of shade, these desirable species will be able to regenerate without competition from other things that you do not want. Such as invasive or native but non-desirable species. So species such as buckthorn, honeysuckle, or hazen and fern are already established in the understory. They can easily dominate and take over a site once that canopy is actually opened up. Excuse me. They will often hinder regeneration of those desirable shade-tolerant species. So it's a really good idea to actually, if you can, treat those species beforehand, before EAB comes in and actually starts reducing that canopy cover. In every case, it's a really good idea. Take care of your invasives and your non-desirables before doing any kind of canopy release. So with all this in mind, some strategies you could consider for dealing with EAB are maintaining or improving upon the forest's ability to adapt to stressors such as pests and pathogens or future climate conditions. And again, simply by increasing diversity is a really good way. Favoring or restoring native species that are expected to be adapted to future climate conditions in our region. So species such as oaks, hickories, and maples and pines, they're expected to do well. And then by avoiding planting or diverting resources to species that are expected to have decreases in habitat or become extinct in future climate conditions in our region. So species like spruce, fir, hemlock, and cedar. Using forest thinnings or improvement cuts to reduce that ash component down to 20%. And then doing this while maintaining proper spacing and stocking levels. In some cases, using what is already there, or rather using current forest composition to guide management for other non-intended benefits or objectives. Depending on your situation, that might be your only option. Leaving high quality trees to serve as crop trees. So considering all species, including ash, to be retained to increase future genetic makeup and quality and diversity of that forest. As mentioned earlier, preventing the introduction and establishment of invasive plants or non-desirable species, and then retaining a component of ash, mature ash, that will act as a seed source and provide that regeneration in that aftermath forest. So in summary, infested trees can be very dangerous and should be removed or treated by a professional. Keeping trees alive is usually cheaper and more beneficial in the long run in an urban setting. And becoming familiar with your woodland and working with a professional forester is one of the best ways to manage your forest. So hopefully all of this gives you something to think about and some idea of where to start with managing for EAB. And here are a few resources just in case you missed any of them during the presentation. These will also be emailed out for anyone interested, so no worries about trying to get them written down real quick or anything. And with that, that is all I have. I will turn it back over to Becca.
Thanks so much, Erin.
Yep.
Is Erin taking questions?
Erin will take, so we have one more little topic we're going to talk about, and then we'll have about a half an hour to talk through questions.
Okay.
So Sue, if it's something you're worried about forgetting, I highly encourage you to put it in the chat, and we'll work through those questions in a few minutes here.
Let's see if I
Yeah,
can.
I'm recording I'm copying, pasting everybody's questions that have been going into the chat. So throw it in there and I'll coordinate it.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so folks, we're going to jump into our last short topic here, and Erin's done a great job talking about how you can manage for EAB on your own property, but there are also a few citizen science opportunities and ways that you folks can help us. So how can you help? The first thing you can do is our shameless plug for IMAP Invasive. So IMAP Invasives is an app and website that's designed for people to record their observations or absence records of invasive plants and pests. So if you're out and about and you're actively looking for EAB and you notice it's in an area, or just as important, you notice it's not in an area, I highly encourage you to record these observations in IMAP Invasives. I check IMAP Invasives regularly, and that lets me know where things are and also where people have looked for them and they aren't. The link to IMAP Invasives is included here, and just like Erin mentioned, all these slides and all this information will be sent out afterwards, so please don't feel like you need to hurry up and jot this down. If you're interested in learning how to use IMAP Invasives, there is a recorded webinar on our APIP webpage, and IMAP themselves on their webpage has lots of great recordings and information about how to use their app. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the Monitoring and Managing Ash Program, or MAMA. MAMA was founded by the Ecological Research Institute, and it's a series of 3 citizen science projects for each stage of EAB invasion. The first stage is actually for even before when EAB has spread to an area. And the goal of these citizen science projects are to inform management decisions by collecting citizen data from a broad geographic range with the ultimate goal of finding lingering ash trees. So lingering ash trees are trees that are in areas infested by EAB, but seem to have some degree of genetic resistance. It's estimated that about 1 in 1,000 trees has some degree of genetic resistance to EAB. And the U.S. Forest Service is working to breed these trees to create genetically resistant trees. So if we can help them find those lingering ash, it goes a long way towards that breeding program. I've included the link here for the MAMA program's list of citizen science projects, and highly encourage you to check out that website if you're interested in any of those projects. Finally, you can help APIP and DEC find biocontrol release sites in Warren County near the hotspot we found. So in order to be considered for biocontrol release, a property has to be over 40 acres with over 25% ash present and EAB also present. So if you know of a property that's pretty large, or a couple of properties linked together that would account for over 40 acres with over 25% ash dominance, in pretty close vicinity to where we found emerald ash borer, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out and let me know so we can get out there and check that out for potential biocontrol release. And my email address is included here, and Emily will also send that out to you folks.
Thank you, Becca. I would also note, just to find Becca's email really quickly and readily, I sent folks reminder, RSVP reminder yesterday evening, and Becca and Erin are both CC'd on those emails to you. So you, in your inbox, you already have my email, Becca's email, and Erin's email if you're searching for it there, but we'll also send it out. I also just want to, I can send these as a follow-up email as well from Erin's resource slide, but just so people can have them as quickly as possible, I'm going to post those resources in the chat now so people can just copy and paste them. So I just put a big chunk of info into the chat so you can just grab that. For just a little bit of housekeeping before we move on to questions and answers. If you are requesting continuing education credits from the Society of American Foresters, please use the chat function now to enter your name and your email. So this is how I'm going to be able to send them the information they need to give you your continuing certification credits. And then if people just put their emails as well, just so I can confirm. That would be super. So we can move on to the Q&A slides while people are still entering in their info, their name and their email to the chat. So I can put your info in there. Thank you. Thank you, Taylor. And this is now, I wanted to plug our upcoming workshops as well while we go through the Q&A. So this is just some subliminal messaging, all of the events that are coming up. We have two more forestry discussions, including citizen science training, having to do with hemlock woolly adelgid, the other, major forest pest impacting the Adirondacks right now. But we also have prevention methods on how to not spread and not introduce invasive species to waterways coming up for anybody interested in angling or are, dreaming about fish like I do. And then also a really fun discussion about native landscaping at your home. And we'll have a special speaker, good friend of mine, an incredible plant expert from the Native Plant Trust, Uli Lorimer, who I can see in the chat, we have some people from Brooklyn. So the former native plant gardener at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. So just think about it. Please join us, spread the word, and I'll collect people's information having to do with the SAF credits in just a minute. But while I do that, or while you plug things in, I was recording some questions. And so we have some info, we have a few questions about resource sharing. So you will be getting all the links that we discussed in this workshop as a follow-up email, and a PDF copy of this slideshow as well. I sent it out last night, but I'll resend it again when I send the link of the recorded webinar, because we want you to use that as a resource as well. And you can reference back to it, because there's a lot of notes in the presentation as well that you can read through. We can also share as much information as any of our local soil water conservation districts would like from us, and we're looking forward to building more relationships with you all. I'm new, Becca's new. I used to run a soil water conservation district myself before coming to this role, so I love my SWCDs. And then, so that's just references and resource questions aside. And then I organize things into topics. So the first few questions have to do with identification. Our first question was, I'll try to read it word for word, but I might have to synthesize it. My neighbor seems to think Asian longhorn beetles are taking out our local ashes. The neighbor says that they've seen them, but they have not seen EAB. So any thoughts from Becca and Aaron about that, of the difference between Asian longhorn beetle and EAB?
Sorry, folks, trying to unmute myself there. So if it's an ash tree that's dying, I would suspect EAB first. The kind of ALB tends to target different trees. Maples tend to be their favorite. And if you have the tree and you can look, ALB has a circle-shaped exit hole as opposed to the D-shaped exit hole of the emerald ash borer. But if it's an ash tree, I would highly suspect EAB over ALB. ALB is also only known to be located in the New York City area in New York State. I'm not sure where that person's calling in from.
I would second that. The ALB, the Asian longhorn beetle quarantine, is like one of the most successful examples of how you can have rapid response in quarantine. And then they're pretty indiscriminate also about tree impacts. So if it's just your ash being impacted and it's not within the 5 boroughs or Long Island. So it's also a quarantine that's lasted for a really long time. And they actually just announced this past year, the USDA said that they believe it's eradicated. So the quarantine's not lifted, but anyway, so those details are important. Aaron, anything else to add?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay, so the next question having to do with EAB is an identification is, if you suspect EAB, should you strip bark in an otherwise healthy tree in order to explore for those galleries? And if so, how much? I have an answer to that, but I want to hear Becca and Aaron's first.
Yeah, so in general, if we're out looking for EAB and we see the signs and symptoms that we can see at a distance, we're seeing, you know, the blonding and the canopy dieback, and we have permission to get up close to that tree, and we start seeing other things like the D-shaped exit holes and maybe some bark cracking, we definitely pull out a draw knife and dig into that tree a little bit to help identify it. If it's in an area that's surrounded by trees that are dead and dying due to EAB, we might not do that, just because if your neighbor has it and, you know, it's highly suspected, it might not be worth it doing that.
Aaron, anything else to add there?
Yeah, exactly what she said. The only reason really you'd peel a tree is if there's actually blonding present. So wherever the woodpeckers have been, they're trying to go for those larvae. So actually peeling directly on top of that blonded section is where you're going to find those galleries.
So what I'm also hearing is, you know, make sure you're seeing those other identifying factors, and where it's the blonding maybe comes up in a more extreme case as we get closer and closer, or if the infestation gets bigger and bigger. But removing bark from a tree also opens trees up to other types of viruses or fungal diseases or insect damage, or can start damaging vascular tissue too. So unless you're seeing those other extremities or extreme circumstances, you want to make sure your tree is as healthy as possible to stave off an infestation too. Great. This is my favorite part. I love this. So another ID question is recommendations on tree ID resources. Any favorite books or guides? And just to clarify, I'm going to assume that's having to do with the Adirondacks. So I am going to send out a USDA tip sheet on Ash ID and an EAB ID, but Aaron and Becca, any favorite books?
Sorry, I was just looking behind myself to see if I could pull it out quick, but one of my favorite books is, I believe it's called Trees of New York, and it's a pretty small, concise guidebook that's really user-friendly for everyone to use, and only limited to trees of New York, so you're not seeing a tree that looks similar to a tree you have, but it's only found in California.
Yeah, it's like 3 by 3 or 3.5 by 3.5. That's a good book for sure. And if anybody else has recommendations, pop those in the chat too, and we can share those ideas. I like the Trees of New York. There's also the Birds of New York, that whole series. V-Tree app is an idea. I haven't heard of that. So now we're getting into a couple of management questions.
I grabbed it real quick. That's what it looks like if folks are interested. Real little guy.
What's the publishing company, Becca?
Publication Adventure.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting into some management questions now. So this person says, I own 50 acres in Dutchess County. I just cut down 8 ash and have acres of dying ash. What are the best practices to treat, cut down, and best replacement trees? That's a big question.
It is. So that is a toughie. It's in general, it's going to be really site specific to what you have going on, as far as spacing, what kind of understory regeneration you have, what soil types you have. I guess I can give 2 different scenarios. If you're looking at, and you think you actually need to replant because say your threshold of ash is above 50% or something crazy like that, and you're going to have to replant. If it's a green ash stand, chances are it's going to be a wet site. So possibly some options for replanting would be like hackberry, sycamore, red maple, silver maple, bur oak. Just those. If it's a wet site, if it's a dry site, you could go with pretty much anything you wanted. So, sugar maple, buckeye, that kind of thing, oaks. It's really, like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of, if you can get a forester out there to take a look at your property, they're going to be able to give you a way better idea just by looking at it and figuring out what the situation is. Sorry, that doesn't really answer it, but.
Well, maybe also some of the resources you added into this discussion, Aaron, can help this landowner.
Yeah,
and the cooperating foresters program, and even just being able to reach out to your local PRISM and your local soil water conservation district, especially if they have a forester on staff, can be really helpful, and possibly make a site assessment. So let's maybe explore some of those bigger questions where a site assessment might be necessary too. Great. Becca, do you have more to add on that concept?
I think the only thing I would add to that is when you're replanting, just making sure that you're planting a diversity of things. It just makes you that much more resistant if another pest comes through or another disease comes through.
So we're getting into some chemical treatment questions. Is chemical treatment cited as being most effective when applied at the roots versus like a foliar spray, I'm guessing, or a, on the trunk?
So soil drenches are typically most effective to trees that are less than, I think it's either 10 or 12-inch DBH trees. So systemic injections, so actually the injections of emamectin benzoate have proven to be the most effective overall. The problem with this, I guess the downside to the soil drenches, they have to be done yearly. And then it's, like I said, it'll only protect a tree that's smaller than 10 inches DBH. So in most cases, you're not going to be wanting to protect that tree necessarily anyway. And in general, the injections, systemic injections, are the way to go for the most part. Same thing with basal bark sprays, same idea. Again, not saying they don't work, that's just injections are way better.
Becca?
I think Aaron covered that very, very well.
Great. The next question having to do with chemical treatment is, has anyone studied the effects of these insecticides or any of the 3 parasitoids that have been used to attempt beetle suppression? So I guess it's asking about background research and research going into this. So I believe there's a lot of research in terms of treatment, and Aaron shared a few resources on it. But if there's any, standout research that either of you know, maybe you could share that with me to share back out with folks.
I'm not aware of any research. I do not think, to my knowledge, that they do affect parasitoids. Not to put Sawyer Gardner on the spot, but she might be able to answer that question.
Hello, I'm Sawyer. I work with USDA, and I've actually worked with Aaron on the IPM program up in in Canton. And I was told by someone who heads it that the insecticides won't really impact parasitoids because the insecticides kill all the larvae before the parasitoids can detect the EAB. So there aren't really any worries there.
So it's impacting Sawyer, it's impacting a different life stage, so we shouldn't be too concerned with it.
Yeah, Well, because the parasitoids detect the EAB larva through vibrations in the tree, and if all the EAB larvae are dead, then the parasitoids won't be able to detect an EAB in that tree, so they will most likely just skip that tree.
That's really great information. Thank you. I'm glad you're on the line. So if other people have ideas too, because we actually have a lot of professional practitioners from different, someone's even here from the Navy. So we have a lot of different people on the line. So if you also have ideas to share, this is a great forum because we don't really get to come together that often unless at conferences or something like that. So thank you, Sawyer. It's very nice to meet you. Here's a really good question about practicality with chemical treatment. Can the pesticides you listed in this talk be applied by the homeowner?
I believe soil drenches can be over the counter, but everything else is regulated and would need an applicator's license.
That's my understanding as well, Erin, and it's important to remember, if you've got something to do with soil drench at your house, you can't go help out your neighbor and treat on their property. Landowners are all only allowed to apply herbicides and insecticides on their own properties.
Yep.
I would also add, if we're thinking of this as a landscape issue, there's, I don't apply pesticides and herbicides myself. So there's safety issues there to think about and storage issues. If you're buying chemicals, a very smart man once told me the best storage solution for herbicides is to have it at the distributor's warehouse before you buy it. So there's a lot of different types of safety issues to think about in the home setting, but also, getting a trained professional is really important when we're in this early detect rapid response, stage of things, right? Because it doesn't only impact your own property, it's also, your neighbor and your park and your farmland and your riparian zone. So it's a wider landscape issue too. But it sounds like there's also a lot of resources to make that cost lower, especially if you can have DEC services or cooperating foresters come and help you just to give, that initial estimate and help gauge what is happening on the ground. This is a more detailed question, so I'm going to zoom in so I read it correctly and hopefully I get it right. So any comment on this? I read a study that said amectin benzoate is highly effective and you get some herd immunity by only protecting 40% of the trees in a denser stand, and infested trees will die, but mature beetles will eat from many trees and be poisoned. I'll put this in the chat just so that Becca and Erin can get an idea for it. We can come back to it as well, because we have a lot of questions, and so we can also move forward if that is a little too detailed and we have to do more background research on it. And we can see if we can get back to it.
Okay. I think I have seen that study. And basically what they're finding in an urban setting is that municipalities can technically treat a third of their trees and get almost a halo effect. So like that saying, when you treat your trees with amectin benzoate, the leaves actually become toxic as well. So if the adults fly from one tree to another, eat those leaves, they will then die. So this actually protects non-treated trees. So theoretically, you could actually treat less trees throughout an urban tree population, and it would cost you a third less. Therefore, you could save more trees in theory.
Becca, anything to add?
Nope, not on that one.
Okay. If anybody has that reference paper, that would be great to share too in the chat, or if Erin has it, you can share it. The next question is having to do more with biocontrol and policy. And I know that was a big question coming into this. So This question is, I've been told that the insect predators of EAB, the biocontrols, have been released in various locations, including in New York, including Broome County. Is this true? And what are the expectations for this biocontrol method going forward?
Erin, do you want to take the first shot at that and then I'll follow up?
Sure. Can you repeat the first part of that question again?
Oh, it has to do with, you know, if biocontrols are indeed being released, and so what's the in New York State, and what's the general efficacy of it, or people's expert opinion on where they hope to see biocontrols go.
Okay. Yes, they are. So the main concept behind that is actually doing these releases will potentially help the aftermath forest. So in essence, initially, the EAB population is so high right now as it's moving throughout our area that biocontrols wouldn't be able to actually keep up with the high populations of EAB. So after EAB has come through and unfortunately killed all the ash trees, as that regenerating forest occurs, these biocontrols will actually help suppress EAB populations enough to let some of these resistant ash trees come up with less pressure and therefore possibly able to survive. And Sawyer can correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, you pretty much hit it. I've also read a lot of research papers that kind of say that parasitoids are starting to establish in other areas like Michigan and Wisconsin. There are also a lot of studies in New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut as well, and they seem to have high hopes. It seems like the parasitoids will target the smaller trees more than the larger trees, so that's kind of also what the IPM program is looking into in Canton, where they're injecting trees with pesticides to see if that can help keep some of the older trees alive until the parasitoid population can kind of come in. But yeah, it seems like parasitoids are hopeful and they will do a good job at protecting a lot of the younger ash.
So as a comment on that too, we have another in the chat. So the importance of, treating your trees and maintaining your stand so that we can sort of give, ash species a fighting chance for biocontrol populations to grow, and then that in fact grows in effectiveness. Is just, we have someone from an area that, is talking about, applying drenches and chemical treatments can be easy and effective for landowners and can lower that barrier to access. And I think that's an important point to make. And so what's really key though, is that folks know how to do it, know what they're working with, know, that they've ID'd the right insect or the right problem, as part of their IPM. Their integrated pest management strategy is a lot of its observations and education. So working with your soil water conservation district, your local Cornell Cooperative Extension, forester, and your local PRISM in order to have as many resources and tools at your disposal as possible before you take something on as a homeowner is really just important. Being educated before you do something. And you're all doing it right now, right? So that's really excellent. We have another biocontrol and policy question. And well, not biocontrol per se, but has DEC, the New York State DEC, considered reducing the maximum distance that firewood can be transported from 50 miles, say, to 25 miles? So I'll say that from the APIP perspective, other than, encourage, increasing our awareness building in order to deploy early detection and rapid response, right? If we don't know what it looks like or what it is impacting, we can't ID it on the landscape. We're also, using our awareness building capacity to inform people that, you can buy firewood as hyper locally as possible, either if you're camping, or buying, kiln dried wood if you're buying wood for a heating source over the winter. And we're going to be sharing a lot of information this upcoming season with all of our local campgrounds, particularly a lot of private campgrounds, so that people have as much information as they need to know to buy local wood. Buy it on every intersection just about. So any ideas, Becca or Aaron or other folks on the line about DEC changing that?
I have not heard anything about that, but that being said, I don't work at DEC. I'm not part of that policy decision-making process.
I have not either, so I wouldn't be able to talk on that.
I would say that, we're not DEC, but we are funded by DEC, and every region across the state is so incredibly different, right? Like sometimes you go whale watching in a different part of the state. But in the Adirondacks, we are tasked with increasing awareness about prevention methods and control of invasive species. And so our DEC funded method of improving this is having a strong communication and messaging with the public that you can buy firewood within 50 feet of your campground. So you don't have to maybe have a policy to have a public awareness campaign, so to speak. So we have some other questions having to do with species to replace that are suitable for landscape trees but not woodlots. If you're removing ash from your home. And Aaron, do you have any, the Adirondacks, we've talked about, having it be climate adaptable and, not at risk to other invasive species, but do we have any tip sheets already for the North Country on species to replace it with?
Not that I'm aware of. Probably, oh boy. Are you speaking in terms of an urban setting or a forested setting? That probably doesn't say per se.
It doesn't necessarily say. I think it depends too, right? Like if you're going to take out, it depends on if you're taking out a huge tree, you're going to have a lot more light come into that situation, right? So you're going to need a tree that's adaptable to those light conditions. If you're going to have a smaller tree come out, you're going to have a lot less light enter that situation if it's a shaded forest area outside your home. So it really depends. And this is also where connecting to your soil water conservation district, connecting to your local Cornell Cooperative Extension is really, really important, or even, connecting with us. So we're always available to answer questions or connect you to your local PRISM to help answer that hyper specific type of question effectively and efficiently. So it depends. All plants, you just want the right plant for the right place. So we just have to figure out where you are. And then we have a few more questions, but they also have to do with volunteering and how to get in touch with APIP to learn about more of these opportunities. So somebody signed up for this through their DEC email, which is awesome. Thank you for doing that. I didn't even know the DEC shared this information. So please, I'll be sending out, the recording of this webinar. I implore you all to get on our listserv if you're not on our listserv already. We try not to spam you with too much information, but we do like to keep the public informed. So we have a pretty fun listserv, I think, and you'll get all the information about our upcoming workshops. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram if you're super tech savvy with Instagram. And we're always promoting our workshops through that. And then, keep checking on our website. So adkinvasives.com is our website, and we have an online events calendar. We're working with DEC to make a more cohesive calendar between all of the different prisms across the state. And with Zoom, you can zoom in from just about anywhere. So what's our next slide? I'll also be sending out information about, so here's our emails again. In terms of volunteering, we do have a lot of different ways to get involved with spotting different invasive species on the landscape. Knowing where invasive species are is also just as important as knowing where they are not. And if you're really interested in forest pests and volunteering, I implore you to come to our upcoming hemlock woolly adelgid workshop. So on February 25th, which is a Thursday, we're going to have more of a classroom portion similar to this of talking about HWA issues impacting the Adirondacks specifically, but also, life cycle of the insect, ecosystem impacts of the insect, how to spot the insect in the field. And that's kind of part one. Part two is more of that citizen science training. We're working with partners across our region with ADK Club, with Lake George Lands Conservancy, and with the Capital Region Prism. So they serve the Albany area and the Mohawk Valley and up to our southern Lake George area. So we're working to actually put together a citizen science sort of a social experiment. No, but it'll be really fun, and you'll get a lot of hands-on training as socially distanced hands-on training in this online workshop. We have a way to adopt trail systems. We're going to give out tip sheets. We're going to connect you with using IMAP Invasives, which is a really easy to use web and mobile mapping app. And that'll allow you to find and detect and enter in data out in the field about hemlock woolly adelgid, which is a really, really, really challenging forest pest that's also emerged or been identified in our area over this past summer. And actually, because of the hard work and knowledge and interest of a citizen scientist who was just camping at Lake George, is how the DEC was notified of this infestation in the first place. So you all being out on the landscape, understanding what these pests are, understanding what these plants are, or different types of invertebrates is truly the only way that this work can get done. So if you're interested in volunteering, please, please, please come to our upcoming hemlock woolly adelgid workshops, part 1 and part 2. And it should be really fun, and we've been working really hard on it with partners. We have so many more questions. Oh, it's so hard to get to them all. So please email us directly if you have other pressing issues, and we'll try to get these resources out to you as quickly as possible. I do not work in the office, but Aaron is sometimes in his office at this time. And so we have his phone number here, but in my signature of my email, I can get you our phone number. I can say no one's ever called me on my office phone. So please email me, that's the best way. Anything else that I'm missing before we sign off? I know we're going a little long. There's just been so many great questions. Okay, well, thank you so much. I think we have a thank you slide, possibly. What's our next slide? Thank you, thank you. And get on our listserv. Please come to our upcoming workshops. I'll send out these resources, and I will share your continuing education credits with the Society of American Foresters if you are interested in getting that. All right, well, have a great day, and we'll talk to you all soon.
And thank you, Sawyer, for letting us put you on the spot a few times today. We appreciate your insights.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
to Aaron and Becca.